our two panelists.
Yeah.
Speak before
Yes,
these
absolutely.
right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Peter, over to you. Thanks.
To Kamala, to Bob, to the Institute, and everybody else who's attending from around the world, thank you very much. You can see the lights are on here. The time is now 10 to 5 in the morning. We've gone past, for us in the Southern Hemisphere, the autumn equinox, so it's all downhill from here. I was explaining to one or two people just prior to the session commencing that we're lagging here in New Zealand on coronavirus vaccinations, but the good news is that we don't have much in the way of the virus at all. We've got off reasonably lightly. But my session today, I've been asked to explore this notion of governing well in family businesses, and in particular, what happens when there's skin in the game, as opposed to the distant shareholder, perhaps the non-emotively connected shareholder. But before I start, I just want to make one comment, and hopefully it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, and that is that as with anything in governance and with boards, there's no one right answer. And so these thoughts are mine. They're from the perspective of my experience as a serving chair on a board of a reasonably substantial family business, but also my experience advising boards and listening and learning elsewhere. And I suspect once we finish and get to the panel discussion and then more broadly the open forum, there's going to be a lot of different ideas come forward, and hopefully out of that, everybody on this call can take something away in terms of how they might go about governing family businesses just that little bit better for greater success and prosperity in the future. So let me get underway. This session, I'm essentially going to cover three things. The first one is I'm going to tell you a story. I am a bit of a storyteller, so because I've got the microphone, I get to do that. Then we're going to just put on the table a whole lot of issues and complexities that are typically apparent in family businesses. And then the third session, we'll look at some options for better outcomes, and I'll speak proposing a few suggestions. They may or may not be well received by others, but I'm hoping that some of them might be just a little bit provocative for the discussion as we move through this session. So my starting point for this session is a conversation that took place in November 2018. And I stood at a stage in Vienna. I was asked to speak at the Global Peter Drucker Forum and did so. And I was talking about family businesses, and I had just come off a phone call with an elderly gentleman in New Zealand asking his permission. I'm going to speak about the same story, but bring it right up to date. So James Thomas Brown, Jimmy Brown, is the 97-year-old patriarch of a family business that he started in 1945, where as a young man, 76 years ago, he went farming. So New Zealand, many of you will be aware, 70% of our export economy is based on what the land produces by way of milk products, dairy products, forestry, wool, meat, etc., wine. And that's basically stayed the same through the last 70 or 80 years. So Jimmy Brown went farming in 1945, and in 1965, he purchased his own dairy farm, 40 hectares, 100 cows, and that got him started. He was married in the 50s, and he and his wife Hilda had 6 children, a girl, 2 boys, and then they did it again, with another girl and two boys. So their age groups are around about 65 years old to around about 58 years old now. So this is an interesting business because of the way it's grown and developed over time, the way the generational baton has passed, and what might happen next. So the scale of this business when it started, as I said, was 40 hectares. It's now 1,800 hectares. It was 100 milking cows at the beginning. It's now 4,600 milking cows and young stock growing. It was exclusively a dairy farming business. It's now horticulture as well. And there's a big plant, a processing facility for packing and cool storing the kiwi fruit products before they go to primarily international markets. So this business is very much one that's made the transition from a farming lifestyle situation to now a business. And that sounds like a fantastic story, and it is. It's a business that's. I'm not going to tell you the detailed numbers because of the commercial sensitivity, and we're recording. But it's a business that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and today it's nicely profitable. This is a family whose success is defined by the land. This is a family who Jimmy, as the patriarch, has used the business as his bank account. So when he's wanted something, he's gone out and used the business bank account to buy, whether it was a car or a whatever. And this is a business that 4 years ago nearly failed. And it nearly failed for the very simple reason that the business became bigger than the family could handle. Jimmy Brown had an almost missionary level of zeal when it comes to not paying tax. He'd rather use profits to grow the business because paying tax is almost evil in his mind. He's quite happy taking on debt and using other people's money. And when I first became involved 4 years ago, I was teaching on a governance training course for rural people, farmers, and two of Jimmy's sons were present. And they took me aside and said, at afternoon tea time one day, and they said, "Peter, can we have a conversation?" "Sure. We'd like to talk to you about missing millions." "What are you talking about?" You know, and the mind is going very, very quickly. And what they said was that they thought they'd had good profit that year, but they had not. And I said, "So that sounds strange. Are you sure that somebody's not conducting anything fraudulently, that your brothers haven't gone and bought something, or you know, would you like to come and have a look?" And I said, "Well, number one, I'm not a policeman. Number two, I'm not an accountant. Number three, I'm happy to come and have a look." So we did. And I said, "But there's got to be some rules. You need to let me ask some questions." "Sure, come and have a chat with us." "Okay, and I want to ask questions of your banker, your lawyer, your accountant, all of you guys, and your father." "Sure." So I did, and what I discovered was quite interesting. This was, from the bank's perspective, their most complex and complicated business arrangement they had of any of their clients in New Zealand. That they were being charged quite a premium on their debt financing because of the complexity. This was a business where the family had become so large in terms of the value, they could not describe all the moving parts. They could not describe how they fitted together. The lawyers and the accountants were having a field day because of the complexity. And the culture within the business was difficult. Man management was hard, and production was stable. And they had got to a point that the EBITDA line, the profit line, had reduced to zero. And so he had this massive asset, and it was doing nothing for them. And so we had a look at it, we made some recommendations, and their first response was, well, we need governance and we want you to be a director. That was their very first response to the report. And I said, no. Why not? Well, you're in a mess and we need to fix the mess, because nobody is going to come on and take the legal responsibilities of becoming a director while there's a mess. And so I agreed that I'd give them a hand with that. And so it took about 6 months just to work through some things and introduce them to some terms that most of us would be reasonably familiar with, like commitment, decision making, collective responsibility, EBITDA, the difference between cash in the bank and capital spend. So there was a lot of stuff to cover off, and at the end of that sort of 6 months, they said, "Would you now come and be our chairman as an independent?" And I agreed. And on 1 July this year, that'll be the completion of my 3rd year, and we're going to have a discussion about moving on. Now, that business then and that business now are quite different. Today, the business is producing a profit of approximately 27% of its top line revenue. It's been simplified, it's been restructured. There are now mechanisms in place for the family to participate and for people to know what's going on. But this example that I've told you, as we move into the second comment that I want to make about identifying some of the complexities and issues that family businesses often come across, is to recognise that this business called Riverlock, that's its group name, is far from unique. There are thousands of family businesses in New Zealand and around the world, across sectors, across countries, across multiple regions, that are founded on a dream, that in various ways have grown, and it doesn't really matter whether it's Lego or BMW or Riverlock or mum and dad, but they've grown and they've achieved great success. And sometimes they've gone on and sold out. Sometimes they've gone on and stably worked through, and sometimes they've grown, as Riverlock did, to a point where they've stalled and without intervention, and it's not my intervention, it's a group of people, but for some interventions, they would have stalled and crashed, just like any organizational maturity curve. And so the family struggles to keep up, the business outgrows the family's capability, business performance suffers, and there's a range of other indicators around quality, around culture, around reputation, that all start to suffer. So this business, and I'll just use it as a threaded example on the way through, not because it's unique, as I said, but because it's pertinent. So this is a company that was starting to struggle to recruit staff because of the reputation it held in the community and beyond as being disorganized, as ruling with an iron hand, if you will. Such was the dominance of the patriarch. There is a rumor, unsubstantiated, but I've heard it from both within the family and without, that Jimmy Brown gave decision rights to his boys quite late in life. He continues to be of the view that it's his business 100%. The shareholding record shows that he and his family trust own 13%, but because they're his boys and he's worked hard all his life, it's his business. So this is a business which displays all of these challenges. Adding to that, we've got mismatched expectations, where some are saying, hey, it's big enough, we want this to be a profitable income generating business. Others are saying, no, we want to continue to grow because big is good. There's a conflation of roles, and this is very typical in family businesses where people get, knowingly or otherwise, a little confused as to whether they're participating from the perspective of a shareholder, a director, or a manager. And our good friend Bob Garratt is quite clear when he talks about the very distinct difference between somebody who's performing a role called executive and that same person performing a role called director. They're not an executive director, they're one person with two different roles. And so there's some clarity as to which hat they might have on at a point. Left unaddressed, these types of issues will quickly result in a company moving from former success to now and also ran. And so the point now moves, because all of that sounds quite negative. But the point moves to, well, if we've got this muddle, how should we proceed? Because these businesses around the world can, and in many cases are, significant employers, significant contributors to social fabric and economic worth and societal well-being. The first comment I'd like to make is this, that unless and until the family recognises that what it's now holding on to might no longer be optimal, that there might be a problem, there will be little change. So if the problem is not recognised, much less a commitment to address the problem, we're not going to get any different. And so the starting point for these conversations is that awkward one around asking the question as to how comfortable are you with the way things are at the moment? And that's a really important starting question. And that's a question that can only come if there's a degree of relationship with some significant senior family members, not necessarily managers that are outside the family, but family members, and it might involve lots of cups of tea and lots of cups of coffee, or in my case, lighting fires and tying the shoelaces of the old man and doing these things over time, which those activities don't appear in most company director board, job descriptions, but that's what happens. And so when these families start to recognise that they might have a problem, that their future course, if it's not changed, might be heading them towards choppy waters, and they could lose a chunk of what they've worked so hard to get on top of. They often turn to professional advisors, and the people that have a key role to play but are not necessarily in the best position are the accountants and the lawyers, and the bank managers, because they're the people that the family might know well. They've spoken with them, they've got this relationship over time. These people can be helpful. But in the case of Riverlock and in the case elsewhere, they can also be part of the problem, because the natural instinct of lawyers, accountants, and bankers is to minimise risk and to status quo. And so if you've got a big organisation that's grown and developed, sometimes it's change that's needed rather than status. So that there might be a problem, that the current reality is different from the desired reality, is the first acknowledgement that needs to take place. And so that traditional response of going to these advisors, even setting up this notion of an advisory board, which has its own problems around deemed directors and shadow directors, if I call them in Australia. It's really a good response, because what you're doing is playing with the symptoms around the margins rather than going to the core, which is what are we trying to achieve? How are we going to arrange ourselves to achieve that? and what do we want out of it? The other traditional response that often happens, and this is where consultants give themselves a bad name, it's a bit like an own goal in that beautiful game, where they start getting told that they should embrace formal governance in a corporate governance, FTSE, New York Stock Exchange perspective, where there's all sorts of systems and processes and structures and diversity and all sorts of things that need to be put in place, which all sounds very good, except that for a mid-sized business, or for a business that's coming from a decision-making around the kitchen table, it has the distinct appearance of completely over the top, over governance, and just bogging down the business, and having people that are innovative, that are entrepreneurial, getting bogged down. So in terms of rethinking how we might move forward, if better outcomes to achieve, the company and the family need to have some sort of agreement and some sort of alignment around what's important. Are we, and I'll speak as an us now, are we a growth-oriented company that want the ego of big, or are we an income-generating company that wants to produce profits so that we can pass those profits by way of dividends and other gratuities to family members? Are we an employment agency for our family? It doesn't matter which one or more of these are selected, but what is important is that there's some agreement around that, so that over time that can be a North Star from which other decisions can be made. So reorientating the company, restructuring it is absolutely crucial. So I'd like to turn to some practicalities, if I could, in three main areas. And let's deal with these: the company, systems and processes, and then the nexus, if you will, to the family. This is the complexity that's apparent in our topic today that's not so apparent in other forms of enterprise ownership. So in terms of the company, absolute clarity around why this entity exists, its purpose, what's its strategy to achieve said purpose over time, and some clearly stated goals to try and measure both progress towards and achievement of. All of that is standard, is a universal recommendation, and I would imagine that Bob, you, Kamla, me, others, when we're advising boards around the world, that's our starting point. If we don't know what we're aiming at, it's very difficult to achieve much forward progress, and that any strategy that might be forthcoming is simply a list of tasks or activities if we've got nothing to measure. And this goes right back to our understanding of governance from the Greeks, that the word comes from kybernetes, which is to provide steerage and guidance and piloting with some sort of goal in mind. And so all of that company stuff is common, but it needs to be tackled, and it's new news to many companies, because in the case of our Riverlock friends, their goal is to milk cows and to grow kiwi fruit and to sell the milk and to sell the kiwi fruit and make money and press reset and do it all again next year. So that's the first piece. The second piece is systems and processes. We need to be in a position that we can look the bank in the eye, look family members in the eye, and know how much money is in the tin, to explain to our bankers that we'd like to borrow some more money to buy this new piece of equipment, this land, to make these improvements, and to explain how the company is performing, what the issues are, to be able to sit down at Christmas time with the family and have a wonderful time, and not have a fight over what is or isn't happening in the business. And again, systems and processes around reporting, business operations, these sorts of things are completely standard stuff that we all recommend in companies of all different types, but they're not necessarily well implemented in a family business or a mid-sized context. And then moving to the family itself, these are the areas that are not necessarily unique to family businesses, but these are areas that in particular need attention if there is family ownership of shares in an enterprise, either 100% ownership, such as the Riverlock case, or dominant ownership if there's family control in different cases. So let me just quickly go through some of these, and I'm intentionally going to pose these as discussion starters and points to explore, rather than to give you categorical suggestions as to how to address them, because I suspect that in different contexts represented on this call and different situations, that there may be some different perspectives that we can helpfully learn from each other. So I've got 6 points here just to mention. The first one is they're not in chronological order. As with many things with boards and companies, we need to wade into the middle, and in different contexts, we might have to start this piece and this piece and push them forward, and then bring something else, and then go over here and then come back. So it's a little bit messy. But for this talk, we're just going to pretend it's linear. And the first one is the shareholders agreement. We need to be able to write down some of the rules of engagement between the family and the business. And so covering off things such as, how will shares in the business be transacted? Who gets to participate? And so that brings us nicely to the second of the big discussion points, which is employment. As a family member, do I have a job within this enterprise as a right? Do I, as a family member, get to choose what I get paid? Those types of questions. It's useful to put into the shareholders agreement that family members and the employment of family members will be a decision made by the manager of that particular role, and that we keep it that no family member will directly employ another family member. So that just keeps some of the tension out of it. So there's the employment question. There's a whole question around reporting. What is the appropriate way to keep family members who are shareholders and family members who are legitimate stakeholders through their membership of a family trust, for example, who might hold shares? How do they get to know what's going on? And what rights, small r rights, what rights might they have to attend and visit the business, to participate, to just come along and talk to any staff member and provide an instruction, where that staff member, given the asymmetry of power, the imbalance, might think, well, Jimmy's the owner, he's the old man, he's saying that I need to put the cows in this field, or he's saying that I need to do this differently. What do I do? And so the question around reporting, around influence, is a question that needs to be explored. What's reasonable? What's not? The question of a family council often comes up. So this is a little different from a shareholder council in any other ownership structure. And my recommendation typically in this regard is think of it as a shareholder council. It is not a body that's there to govern the business. It's there as a bridge, as a nexus between those interested family member shareholders and the board, and they may or may not to participate in the appointment of directors, and they have no role in the running of the business. The buying and selling of shares. Is this a business where shares are limited to the patriarch or the founder and the bloodline that flows in successive generations? If I want out, how do I get out as a shareholder? We all, as I well know, because my wife and I over Easter went for this walk up this steep hill a few kilometres away because we thought it'd be a good idea before winter closes in. And we both realise our age now with our muscles and our legs got a good workout, and we're not quite as fit as what we were. So the need to succeed and pass on comes to us all. So as a family business, are we running this for our generation and we're going to sell it? Or are we looking for a construct to move it on? These are questions that are usefully discussed. They are not company questions, they're family questions. And I want to draw that distinction there. So in terms of these practicalities, there are a series of areas that are common to most companies that it's important to get clear on and agreement on if the company is to prosper in the future, around purpose, strategy, shared goals, systems and processes, business operations. And then those are the first two groups. And then the third group, is the family component. And so the important distinctions, and I will make this comment and then perhaps and then just move to sum up. The first point is this, that we need to be absolutely clear what's family business and what's business. That matters of decision that involve the company, the ultimate decision maker is the board of directors. That the delegation for the implementation of those decisions lies with the company, whether it's a managing director, a chief executive, a leadership team, however that construct is assembled, and that there's accountability put in place, and that those company directors that are sitting there around the board table may or may not be family members, but they're sitting around the board table 100% and exclusively in their role called company director. So there's a lot of learning and education that needs to take place. I want to turn back now, before I hand over, to the story that I told you at the beginning. Riverlock, Jimmy Brown's company, remains absolutely a work in progress. The shareholders of that company realised that changes were needed, that family members had feuds, that family members like each other, but because they were dealing with something that they no longer understood, there was one situation where now a 30-something-year-old abused an older family member simply out of frustration, and probably in both cases, it was before I got involved by some years, but the result of which there was some significant tension between family members through well-intended but misguided interaction. The Riverlock, the Brown family, the Riverlock business, the shareholders realised that changes were needed, otherwise they could lose it all. They chose to embark on this journey. They realised and intended that it would be a multi-year trek over 3 to 5 years. They decided to tackle the structural stuff first because that was a low-hanging fruit. Back into the company, some systems and processes. And now, after 3 years, we are starting to have some really grunty and useful, deep and meaningful, actually, conversations around what family members do and do not want. And those types of pieces will go into the shareholders' agreement. The rate of progress that they've chosen is steady rather than speedy. And all of it is contingent on trust and desire, and where they sit now, as I commented, is they're producing an EBITDA, so a pre-tax, pre-bank interest an EBITDA result of approximately 24% of gross revenue. And according to the bank, and I met with the bank manager, some senior people on Thursday, before Easter, they're now considered to be in the game. There's more to go. This is a business where they've got clarity of purpose, but they're now the conversations around transitioning, around income streams. The hard stuff is now starting. So Kamala and Bob, what I'd perhaps like to do there, I know I've covered a broad spectrum of ground. I've touched on many points that no two family businesses are the same, but I hope that the story, the discussion points around some of the issues and some of the areas that need to be tackled might provide us some useful stubs from which conversations can commence. So I'll just stop there.
Peter, many thanks. And you have drawn a very comprehensive map and asked some very interesting questions. My problem is to stop myself speaking, so the best I can do is immediately ask Dr. Annette Rahael, would she please give us her experiences and, if possible, compare and contrast some of the things that Peter's been talking about over the next 10 minutes, please. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, first of all, Peter, thank you for the presentation. And the first thing I do want to say is I fully endorse the question of the family having shared vision and common goals for the business. Because without that, we are not even in the same bookshelf, far less on the same page. So that is really critical, that we get together. And I start when I work with family businesses, even getting down to our values and so on. So we all understand where we're going to go with this business. Now, Peter, in the Caribbean, our businesses have maybe started after World War II. We are now going into from second to third generation in a lot of cases. And we are still, in a lot of businesses, at the stage where shareholder, director, employee, same person. So it's really a challenge now to get people to learn to separate their roles. Right? But as I deal with more families, where we start getting the passive shareholders, those who are members of the family, who maybe have inherited shares, but they are nowhere involved with the running of the business, the level of communication, the level of trust, the level of reporting becomes really critical, and how that is done. And with regard to your question of shareholders agreements and family council, I usually do a family charter where some of the things you talk about, we put into place, which is really, and I tell people the family council is the board of the family. That's the kind of description I like to give it. And some of what comes out of the family council goes into the shareholders agreement, because ultimately, especially with second and third generation, they're still, the family council usually all active shareholders. You know, so so some of what we agree upon there, and I want to endorse the fact that this is a process. It takes, as you said, 3 years. It takes months. It takes meetings after meetings, repeat meetings, write the policy. Yeah, some coffee. Write the policy, and it's not unusual that I have a meeting, everybody agrees, and I say, okay, let me put it on paper and send it to you for a second look. And of course, by the time the next meeting comes around, two persons have changed their mind, one other person doesn't agree, and so on. So it takes a while for a family to get there where there can be a consensus, not even unanimous agreement on certain areas going forward, like family employment. Those are very contentious things. The role of in-laws is a big one. So sometimes we don't get to absolute unanimous, and that's fine. Once we get a reasonable amount of consensus. The next issue, the businesses are maturing in the Caribbean, so we have businesses that are big enough to have the things you spoke about, all the systems and the processes, and what a term I don't like to use, but what is commonly called the professionalization of the business. So we are getting there, right? The next step really becomes the governance, and for want of a better word, we use corporate governance. And it is corporate governance, but sometimes that word could frighten people in family businesses away. You know, they begin to think of the kinds of public companies and how they are governed. And they begin to worry about the cost of having a board and all the committees and so on. So you're perfectly right to say that there is a sweet spot in my mind between under governance and over governance. Now, when I get the next generation MBAs, they want to over govern, right? Because some business school has taught them that this is how it should be, and you should have an audit committee and a compensation committee, and God knows whatever else, an HR committee and so on. And so we have to talk them down to say, hey, we have got to walk here, we've got to crawl before we walk, before we run, right? So at the same time, the bedroom cannot be the boardroom. So it's getting the right people around the board table becomes challenging. In small countries like we are in the Caribbean, family businesses are very reluctant to open up their books, to open up their family business to outsiders, quote unquote. I remember once I was at a seminar, a girl said, family businesses are not closely held. We are hermetically sealed. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. So the thing about it is, how then do we progress to getting directors that the family can trust? Is a very big thing. And also the right kind of directors. I was very glad to hear you talk about lawyers, bankers, and accountants, because one of the steps is they love to go directly to, let's bring in our lawyer, or let's bring in our accountant. And I am always pushing back against that. I say, listen, let's just get somebody with good business acumen in here. And let's have true independence. Let's not get somebody on this board that is relying on this business to get some of their own business. Because then you bring a lawyer in, he's going to see everything through legal eyes and want to create, sometimes in my opinion, create situations that require his input as a lawyer, which are really not necessary. So the challenges that I see in the Caribbean, the trust issue, and I think the more we get that going and we get good, like if CCGI has good directors, and the more we can get people to trust that they can bring in a couple of external directors. The other problem is a lot of family businesses say to me, I mean, I want to run my own business and I don't want any board coming to tell me what to do. So you have to get the right kind of director who is persuasive without being aggressive, who is able to sort of ask the right questions. In fact, I say a good director asks the right questions. He or she, especially an external director, is not supplying the answers, right? If they ask the questions and somebody else in the room supplies the answers, or if the family realizes they don't have the answers, then maybe the director can suggest where they can go find the answers, or a way of thinking about it to get to the answers. So that, I think, puts family members at ease if they recognize that they are not bound by all this advice. Having said that, I also say to them, listen, if you bring serious people on a board and they give you some advice and they go through stuff with you and you never implement, you're going to have very high turnover. You're going to get resignations every 6 months. Because no serious person is going to come there just to be part of your talk fest and then you go off and do whatever you want anyway. So that is another balance that we have to get for our family businesses in the Caribbean. Let me see what else. That really is about what, I don't know, I think my 10 minutes could almost be up. But those are the things the challenges that we have. The final thing I will say is this. It is also challenging for us to get families to make that separation between the family and the business in terms of control of the business. So one of the biggest issues is that we're setting up a board. Sometimes they want every family member who is working in the business, whether they're working in the warehouse or working in the C-suite, to be on the board. So I have to get them to understand, but no, you have to be able to make a contribution. And I will be honest, I use all kinds of mechanisms that probably you guys will not approve of, but I sometimes say, because everybody wants to train their next generation, which is lovely. So the next generation is barely in the business 1 year, but they want them in the boardroom. So I create a corner and I say, well, your job is to sit there and listen to, because the parents insist, they want them there. sit, you're to say nothing, right? Just listen and observe. After everybody is left, you may ask your father for clarification or something, because they remember they want to pass it on as a legacy business, and they feel that the sooner they get their children involved at whatever level, the better it is. So those are some of the challenges we have, and some of the solutions I sometimes suggest. But I do see in the Caribbean more and more of the family businesses want to implement boards and want to have serious boards with external directors. Partly sometimes to mediate family conflict. And I say to them, okay, we're not hiring a family therapist here. And if you get the right kind of person, he or she may be able to offline mediate some argument between the two brothers, or more often than not, the father and the son, or the father and the daughter. But that also is something that could have family directors shy away. People from the outside shy away because they don't want to get involved. I've asked people to sit on board, and they say to me, does the family have their act together? And I know exactly what they mean. Am I going to come in here and have to, stand with my boxes, push you aside and push you aside? So basically, that's it. The advisory boards, our Companies Act is so stringent that a lot of people, because the directors are legally responsible for anything that happens, a lot of people are reluctant and hesitant at first to come on as a legal director. So another mechanism I've used is say to them, well, will you serve for 1 year as an advisor, not quite a legal director, and then after that year, when you're comfortable, we put you on the letterhead. It's not necessarily an advisory board, but you're not there. You have the same rights as a legal director in terms of advice and so on, but not the same liability until you are comfortable.
Annette, are
Yes.
you comfortable? We pause there at the moment. I bring in Amin Nasser, and then we all join in the open session in about 10 minutes' time. Are you comfortable with that?
I'm good.
Excellent, thank you.
I went over my 10 minutes.
Please let us welcome Amin Nasser, who, again, Camera has mentioned beforehand. So he's both not representing, but he is a senior participant in the Gulf Cooperation Council Board Development Institute, based in Dubai, but covering the 6 Gulf countries, and also a member of PwC. I mean, you're most welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this platform. And thank you all for dialing in, and and I hope everybody's safe in these challenging times. We've all been talking about directorships and about good corporate governance. I'm going to give it a bit of a different slant. Just to start off with, I just want to give you a bit of an idea of what the Middle East is all about in terms of family businesses. So, in the Middle East, obviously, like all countries, family businesses are, the backbone of the economies in the Middle East here. And the Middle East family businesses are very young. We're only in the 2nd generation, going to the 3rd generation. The businesses started about 60, 70 years ago as entrepreneurs, and they quickly developed very large and successful conglomerates. And therefore, a number of these families, around 80% of these families, will go through a generational change in the next 5 or 10 years. And the thing is, I mean, if you talk to financial institutions, they say that around $1 trillion will change hands when this generational change occurs in the next 5 to 10 years. And the thing is, if the generational change is handled well, and if the family businesses are properly structured, this will promote growth, it will promote stability, it will promote employment, and all those good things, and the economies will benefit. But if the generational change is handled badly, then this could result in fragmentation of family businesses, the results of which could be absolutely catastrophic. Now, in the Middle East, unfortunately, in the last few years, we've seen an uptick in family conflicts and feuds in the region. And I'd like to talk about that because I think it's important for the directors in family businesses to understand these dynamics. And really, we're lucky in a way in the Middle East because the Middle Eastern family members, if you like, have huge respect for the older generation. So there's a huge respect for the founders, and therefore, to a certain extent, they are protected in that these conflicts don't come out. But can you imagine what would happen if when the founders pass away and when the founders retire? It will be very, very chaotic, and we've started seeing some of these families going through these challenges. And conflicts, it's a common thing. It exists in all families. It exists in my family, in your family, and most likely it exists in many family businesses. And in my experience, dealing with family businesses in the region for many, many years, most of these conflicts in family businesses are not caused because of poor business performance, but they're usually or mostly caused by a perception in people's minds that they're being unfairly treated. Okay, and these situations arise because of lack of transparency, lack of communication between family members. And also families wrongly assume, to be honest, that just because they are brothers and sisters, that they will always agree. And the other important thing to note is that family businesses that were previously run by siblings from the same mother are now being run by cousins who are not as close to each other as brothers and sisters, and this creates another issue. In the Middle East, we've started to deal with conflicts, and one of the things that we've been thinking about and talking to families is the whole issue about having a common vision for the future. Okay, we talk about having proper corporate governance and policies and procedures and shareholders agreement. To my mind, a very important aspect is actually to go back and see what the vision is and whether we have a common vision as far as the family is concerned, because lack of alignment in the vision can cause all sorts of issues. Now, let me give you an example. I was in Oman a couple of years ago, and I was talking to a very, very successful entrepreneur who started from nothing, okay? And he said to me, look, I've created this multi-billion-dollar conglomerate out of nothing, and I want this to go to my children. I want it to go to my grandchildren. I want to leave a legacy behind. And he said to me, Amin, can you please talk to my eldest son and see what he thinks about it? So I go see him. He takes me to his office and we sit down and have a good conversation. And then he opens his laptop, produces some spreadsheets and some discounted cash flows and says to me, in the next 2 years, we're looking at going IPO. And I looked at him and said, listen, I've got nothing against family businesses going IPO as long as it's for the right reasons. But when was the last time you shared this vision with your father? Because, aligning the vision, because your father is his vision about the sustainability and about the future of this business is very, very different. I think we started talking about family employment, and I think Peter mentioned it as well. And I think he's absolutely right. Family employment is one of the biggest issues that we're seeing in the Middle East. It's all about performance evaluation of family members, and that could be quite tricky. Can you imagine having to say to a family member that who's not performing well, that he's got to really exit the business? It's not a very easy task. And there's also other questions. Why is he the CEO? Why am I not the CEO? Why is his son being promoted and not my son being promoted? Now, when we talk to a lot of these family businesses these days, they say to us that we want to employ the best people. Okay, and if they do well, we will promote them. We will give them incentives and we'll give them bonuses. But if they don't do well, we will ask them to leave. And we don't have that flexibility of hiring and firing if we employ family members. And so most recently, a lot of families in the region have been looking at their employment models, for instance. And some of them have been saying that, look, maybe family members should not be employed as executives, as management in the operations of the business, and that maybe their roles should be as directors in the business, along with independent directors of the holding company and subsidiaries, and maybe they should be more involved on the strategy side and leave the day-to-day operations of the business to professionals. The other issue in the Middle East that causes a lot of issues is around dividends and dividend payments. Whether how much of the dividends will be paid to the family and how much will be reinvested in the business. The passive shareholders in the Middle East depend a lot on the dividends to support their lifestyle. It's something very, very important for them. And actually, this reminds me of a particular family in the Middle East where there were 8 brothers and sisters in this family businesses as shareholders, and one of the family members did not have any children. And every time there was a discussion around investments and a discussion around dividends, he would be very vocal. So, for instance, if they were looking at investing for the future, he would always veto the investment. Why? Because he wants to maximize, from his own perspective, the amount of dividends that's payable to him. And this carried on for a while until one day the family business got a huge contract from the government for about $1 billion. But in order for them to execute the contract, they needed bank finance for that. And the banks were saying, look, you need to capitalize some of your retained earnings, convert the retained earnings into capital so that you have a much stronger balance sheet. And in order for them to do that, they needed all shareholders to sign a document saying they would be happy to capitalize retained earning. And guess what? That family member who wanted to be paid a lot of dividends was not going to sign any document to transfer retained earnings to capital. So, cut a long story short, because we haven't got time, the family had to negotiate an exit for that family business. And guess what happened? They had to pay him a huge premium on that valuation because of the fact that they wanted this to happen. This is such an important thing for them. So the lack of processes for future exits and the valuation methodology and all of that is quite important, because if you don't have an agreed methodology for valuation, family members who will exit in the future will want to maximize their payout, and will always argue that their shareholdings are worth a lot more. And I think somebody spoke about in-laws. I think it was Annette that spoke about in-laws, and you're absolutely right. The in-laws do cause a lot of issues in the Middle East as well, and you need to have a lot of clarity, and they have to be treated in a consistent manner, because if you're not careful, these in-laws can quickly become outlaws and create a lot of issues. And one of the unique issues of the Middle East, and you might find this very interesting, because I don't think you have that issue, is under the Muslim law, a founder can marry 2 or 3 wives. And from a family business perspective, you know, as long as the founder is alive, you've got 3 wives, for instance, you've got 3 houses, 3 branches, 3 family members from each branch. And as long as the founder is alive, everything's fine, because he manages all the 3 houses. But guess what happens when the founder is no longer there? You know, there's all sorts of issues that come up. So, so just another 5 minutes, and another 3 minutes, and I'm done. I just wanted to just share with you some of the tips that we've been talking to families about, and this is not rocket science, really. So one of the key things for me is around vision, and I mentioned this before, and I'll mention again. You know, it's about families saying to themselves, today we're a family of 8 or 10 or however many family members you have. In the next generation, every generation is about 25 years. In the next generation, you'll be 30 or 40 family members. What is it that's going to happen to this family? What barriers are you're going to face as a family? You know, how are you going to make decisions, for instance? What are you going to do with family employment? How are you going to handle exits? What are you going to do with in-laws? All those sort of issues. You know, are we going to have a family office? Well, how are we going to enhance our wealth? So the visioning is extremely important. And then the next thing is for families to do is to create formal governance structures. And what I mean by that is not just family boards, because again, you know, I think if we only limit it to family boards, then we're not actually dealing with the family in total. Families should create forums that deal with family issues separate from business issues, okay? Because these family issues can be as important as business issues, and it's usually the family issues that actually trip the family businesses, and a lot of the family businesses have actually gone down because of the family issues and not the business issues. And the best time to create these rules or protocols or constitution or whatever you call them is when a family business is in reasonable harmony. Because once the family is in conflict, I can tell you, you know, it will be very difficult to create rules. And unfortunately, you know, consultants are usually called in by families when it's a bit too late. And one of the things that I always say to families is, look, it's not about professionalizing the business, because everybody talks about professionalizing the business, right? Let's have independent directors. Let's have policies and procedures. Let's have, you know, good reporting. Let's have accountability. But we seem to forget that the family needs to be professionalized as well. So it's about professionalizing the family as well as professionalizing the family business. That's very important. And another thing is, it's about fairness. I think that fairness is a key ingredient to a successful family business, and a family business that can be sustainable for the future. And as long as family members are fair with each other and treat each other in a consistent manner, then you have a good chance of actually being sustaining. And lastly, you know, because my conversation was around conflicts, and I think it's very important to set up a conflict resolution committee or mechanism for family businesses, so that members in the family in conflict can discuss and air their views in an independent and objective manner. Because if you don't have a mechanism, guess what will happen? Family members will start talking to their friends, will start talking to their lawyers, and when things like that happen, it's like washing your dirty laundry in public. And very soon, the family reputation can be in tatters. And the family resolution committee can comprise of independent directors or trusted members of the family, etc. I'm sorry I kind of waffled for a bit. I hope the kind of the overview of the Middle Eastern families is useful for you.
I mean, many thanks. Can we pause it there? And now we can open up to the, we've had inputs now across 4 continents. So let us hear what questions or comments we have now from the rest of our members, the network. Can you say who you are when you're speaking and where you're from, please? Who's going to ask the first question or make the first comment, please? Is there anybody out there?
And I may also remind persons, if they don't want to speak, they can type their question or comment in the chat feature.
Yes.
And we will read it out for them.
Yeah, okay.
Bob, just if I may, while people are gathering their thoughts, endorse the comments that Annette and Amin made. They were, I was listening to both of them, thinking that yeah, these issues are very, very familiar, very, very real, and the succession transition and the importance of it cannot be overstated. And Amin's comments, particularly around conflict resolution, and some of these very hard issues require very soft treatment to sort of chat our way through. But there are a couple of hands up now, Bob.
Okay. Who would like to go first?
We also have one question in the chat that was sent to me, so maybe I can read it, and then we can take the question from Nikisha afterwards, okay?
Okay, I don't have that, yeah.
Yeah, so the question is, can you elaborate a bit more on what is meant by professionalizing the family?
Okay, so I think that question was directed to me. So, you know, what I mean by that is, as family members, right, and as shareholders, we receive benefits from being part of the family. And what are the benefits? The benefits are we receive dividends from the business. We also receive a lot of reputation from the business community. But with, you know, with benefits, there are obligations. And the shareholders are obligated to basically respect each other, to make sure that they get on with each other in a professional kind of manner. And professionalizing the family business is about respecting the rules that the families create, respecting the decision of the majority. So let me give you an example. What you don't want is a shareholders meeting where you discuss issues, or a board of directors meeting where you have a, you know, a mixture of family and independent directors, and you know, you discuss a particular business issue, and a decision is made based on the rule of majority, okay? And one of the family members goes out, slams the door, and starts actually rubbishing the decision and rubbishing those family members that made the decision. As a family member, you need to have cabinet responsibility. Let's have our discussions within the board or within the shareholders assembly, but when we're outside, we need to come up with one voice. And this is what I mean by professionalizing the family.
And let me just say, I mean, you spoke about the need of a family forum, and what I like to do during family forums is exactly educate family members. Because in a family forum, the ones I conduct, sometimes they allow like 16-year-olds. The age apparently could be 16-year-olds. And in the forum, we explain everything to them. We teach them, we educate them about the business itself and about their role as shareholders and potential shareholders, particularly with regard to their conduct, especially in small locations where the business could carry whatever name, but everybody knows who the owners are and who the owners' grandchildren are. So the behavior even reflects so much on the business without even realizing it, they are influencing how their family is earning a living.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean,
really, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, introducing family members, young family members, as observers in family council and shareholders assembly is a very, very good idea. My only caution to you is that families have also been introducing family members in the board in the board situation as observers as well. and that can be problematic, especially amongst the young family members, because confidentiality then becomes an issue.
Correct. So we usually put that in the family forum, not the boards. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. The transition point between my role as a family member in a council situation where there might be some conflict and in a board situation where the tenant of collective responsibility, the cabinet, is one that's often overlooked. What we've done in the Riverlock situation is said that there are 4 brothers who comprise the board, and I'm the only outsider. So there was a long journey to enable a level of trust for somebody else to be inside the tent for that decision-making process. And every now and again, we need to remind ourselves that the decision of the team remains the decision of the team, and we're not going to try and relitigate it or badmouth it, as Amin said, and that we've set up a mechanism which seems to work for this family just now, but it might change in the future, which is we'll sit down with the entire shareholding twice a year. We don't call it an annual meeting or anything like this. We just call it a shareholders update. And we sit down and we have a meal together. We do it over food and we just chat. So what's going on? And it might be anything operational right through, because 3 of our directors are also leaders inside the business, and they've got similar shareholdings. But some of these people are not particularly adept communicators, and so I'll sit with them. What do you want to say? Don't know. Okay. Do you think that they might be interested in this and this? Maybe. And then he'll say to me, why don't you tell them? I says, no. You tell them. And if you get a question, you answer the question. And so it's almost like, in some cases, that you're, and Amin's, he's implied it, and Annette as well, we're providing almost a school teacher or a fatherly or a motherly figure to these well-intended family members who have not necessarily been exposed to these things. So having observers can be good, but the soft side or the potential dark side is the confidentiality and the respect. So there needs to be some careful discussion, usually by the independent rather than by the father or the uncle, just to expose some of these things so they can think about it. I sit with a patriarch who's now in a nursing home. I sit with the patriarch for around about 20 minutes after every board meeting. And we talk about the weather, we talk about the cows, we talk about the decisions. He still wants to come to the meetings because he thinks they're his meetings. But he said, you know what? As long as I know what's going on, I'm happy. And long as you're not making dumb decisions. And what he really means is, as long as you're making decisions the same as what he would have otherwise made. So sometimes we don't lie to him at all, no way. But sometimes we might be slightly economical with the full truth. And this is all about the family dynamics and politics.
Okay, Kamala, I've got a slight problem. I'm getting nothing on my chat feed at all. You can see things, I can't at the moment. Are there any other questions?
There was one, but I think we should go to Nikisha because she has her hand up, and then Alison, and then we'll come back to that other one. But let me also share with persons, you can put your questions to everyone in the room in the chat, and that way everyone can see it as well.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, Nikisha.
Hi, everyone. I have one particular question, and it has come to fruition as a result of what Ms. Rahael, I hope I'm saying that correct, had shared with regards to, people who would go to institutions and study corporate governance and they are taught to really formalize governance. And then when you come into a family business, you get the shock of your life that is not really what happens in reality. So what I want to know is, how can the role of the corporate secretary be utilized to assist family businesses that don't have a very formalized governance system, but they do want to operate in a particular way that adheres to certain things, but it's not necessarily black and white and always with heavily laden policies and procedures? How do you use that role to assist the board with getting more closely integrated to dealing with issues that will arise 10, 15 years down the road that we may not be seeing right now as the business grows and exceeds the family's capabilities, as someone said, especially with those issues that are company business, not necessarily family business, because the corporate secretary wouldn't really be involved in those discussions that happen around the dinner table, but in essence, they will still have to come and put in place things that would have been discussed in that forum and then put it into procedures, policies, formalize it, that kind of thing.
Peter, do you want to come back?
Yeah, you're right, Nikita. You raise a really, really important point here, and that is the role of a person who is often overlooked. And that's the secretary. And I talk about the intimacy of the relationships because it is parallel almost to a spousal, not quite relationship between the chair and the chief, if I can use the corporate terms, but also between the chair and the secretary. That the person who's in the room to record the minutes, to be aware of any legal or structural pieces has a crucial role to play. And the way I like to play it is to have that secretary as the confidant of the chair, and to ask them to have their ears and eyes wide open in the wider community for the types of things they might discern are coming into the future, and then together with the chair suggest that the two of them need to bounce around these ideas and work out how they may or may not be tabled for discussion at the board table, because as you say, what we learn in business schools and what gets applied appropriately in family businesses can be a world apart. And so there's quite a bit of discernment. Andrew Kakabadze from Henley talks about maturity and wisdom, and both of which are needed in spades for the secretary and for the chair. I'm not particularly a fan of the secretary embracing inadvertently the role of a director.
Can I add a little bit there, please? I'm working at the moment with a very large conglomerate in the Gulf, and they had a major problem. The founding father died rather unexpectedly, and then the next generation, the chairman, was appointed with agreement throughout the family, who then died in a car crash, which then put some real dynamics around the family, to say the least. There were 6 brothers and sisters, 4 sisters, 2 brothers. The 2 brothers were voted in to become the chairman and the deputy chairman with agreement. And then from there on, it's been really problematic because the 4 sisters are all running major parts of the business, major companies in their own rights, and without doubt are outperforming the brothers. They're of an age now where they're getting into the 3rd generation. There are 18 members of the 3rd generation, only one of whom wants to join any of the businesses. Yet they're all directors, and it was perhaps unfortunate that it was agreed by the board of the holding company that every member of all the generations will be guaranteed an annual income of $1 million US without having to do a thing. And that then sets an interesting dynamic in the whole thing. The only person who really wants to be working in the 3rd generation has been to a US business school is very, very keen to try and modernize the business. And he's not liked by anyone else around the boardroom table. So things can get very emotional at that point. And we're just beginning to work very slowly through that. But what interests me is one of the persons, comes back to answering the previous question. The one thing they've done that everybody agrees with is to appoint a fully qualified and very experienced company secretary. And rather than rush in and tell them what they're doing wrong, what the company secretary has done is to produce a very concise report going through all the company law and all the new codes which are just coming in that country, and showing whatever's happening around the family table at the moment, this is what the law and the codes are going to demand of you in the future, like it or not. And then he's starting from that end with the chairman, who frankly is bored rigid by the whole affair and hates the fact the family is really being torn apart at the moment. But the chairman is beginning to realize this may be the best way to literally rationalize what is going on and begin to say to members of the family, this is what the future is going to be, whether you like it or not. Do you want to be in or out?
Okay, and maybe we can take the question from Alison now, because we also have Ria's hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I think my question was going to be along the lines of some of the discussion that's been going on. I know when I've been working with family businesses here in Africa, the biggest issue has been around not overdoing the governance. So I was very interested and like the comments that Annette and all three of the presenters and responders were making on that issue. And I've sometimes had issues around saying to people, okay, so what are the problems that you feel you have in your business? You know, what issues are you concerned about? Whether it's, you know, I can't leave the office because somebody needs to be in charge of the money, or you know, I've a problem on the dynamics of how do we make decisions. You know, my brother's making decisions one side and I'm trying to make decisions here, and then not using the normal terminology that we use, but then talking about, okay, so how can we make decision making more effective, or how can we solve the problem of the money? And you know, in your head, as a governance expert, you're dealing with internal controls and other terminology, but not frighten them or overwhelm them with that terminology. So I was in total agreement with a lot of what you were saying. And I think, you know, as board secretaries or company secretaries in the Caribbean, to be open to being that flexible in your terminology and trying to, I think, as Peter was saying, see where there are issues and being commercially aware of what the business needs, rather than necessarily always looking at maybe what the law or the regulations say. I accept, Bob, what you're saying in certain circumstances with certain types of organisations, that almost has to be your starting point. But in some, you can, where you don't necessarily have regulations, to try and listen to what's needed and work with that and start from that starting point. I've always found has been a good way of approaching it.
Okay, do we have one more question before we take our 15-minute break, please?
So we have two questions, actually.
Two questions.
We have one in the chat and then we'll have Ria, okay? So I'll ask the chat question first. It's, what structures or systems can families adopt to separate dealing with family business from the business, as Dr. Crow, I believe, alluded to? Should a family council deal with business issues, or is it focused on harmony amongst the family?
This is where I get out my great big grey line pencil. I think that the discussion may benefit Bob and Kamala from all three of us responding to this. My comment is, where possible, the Family Council needs to deal with family matters as if it's the shareholder, and leave the running of the business to the board, and that there's some formal or informal mechanism for that. And I'm going to use the word coordinator of that Family Council to speak with the chair of the board, who may be a family member or may be an independent director, it doesn't matter. But there's some sort of mechanism set up, some sort of agreed protocol in the same way that the shareholder of a small private business or a large listed firm might have access to make contributions. So the starting point for me is we try and narrow the line and discuss and agree the appropriate communication protocols. So they have got access, they have got a feeling of involvement. But if I can use the negative, they keep their fingers out.
Yeah.
Others may have a different view.
Yeah, if I can just add a couple of points there. The terminology sometimes creates a lot of confusion. The role of a family council in different parts of the world have different meanings. Okay, so in my experience, it's very, very important to separate business issues from family issues. And here you've got three separate bodies or three separate forums in a family business. You have the shareholders assembly, okay? You have the family council, and you have a board of directors. These three forums are very different and have to be treated very differently. Otherwise, you will have family issues being discussed at a board level, and you will have shareholder issues discussed in the family council, and which you don't want. The shareholders assembly is an assembly where shareholders meet and discuss shareholder rights, you know, in terms of electing directors to the board, approving dividends, changing articles of association, and all the sort of things the shareholders do. Okay. The board of directors' responsibility is to set the strategy, agree the strategy with the shareholders, and make sure the strategy is executed. The family council, from my point of view, is a forum where family members meet to discuss family issues. You know, be it welfare issues, charitable issues. What are we going to do with family members who are incapacitated? How are we going to mentor our next generation? What are we going to do with the career path of our children? Are we going to have medical insurance for our family? Those are family kind of issues. And that's the right forum for it to be discussed.
I totally agree with that. If it's okay with people, may I thank very much Peter and Annette and Amir for an excellent session there. As I say, we're taking a 15-minute break now, and then we come back and we're open to anybody's ideas, not just what I showed at the beginning, but what things still coming out of this session and anything else that's going on. Because there's so much going on in the world at the moment. Corporate governance is really beginning to take off, but in very different directions from those that we've been used to, certainly over the last decade. And this network is meant to stimulate and implement some of those ideas. So let's meet in 15 minutes. Thank you very much to our three excellent speakers and for their really rather thought-provoking inputs. And let's meet again. Thank you very much. Kamala.
Professor Garratt, let me just add, for those persons who are new to us, first time attending one of our meetings, the room will remain open. However, you can just mute your mics or take off your videos, but Christy is in the background. So you can either stay where you are, take a quick bathroom break, and come back, and then we will resume the discussions again.
Many thanks. Okay, see you in 15.
Yes, thank you.
Lovely. Bye.
So So let me welcome everyone now to our discussions for the International Women's Network. As discussed earlier, this really is an informal network which allows persons with similar interests or desire to understand and discuss the changing practices and governance to come forward, bring our thoughts together, and help us all frame the discussion as we move forward. Professor Garratt had indicated earlier, those persons who gave presentations for the global conference and who really helped set the tone for our discussions moving forward. How many of them are progressing in their respective areas. But of course, the evolution of governance practices, is not static. It goes in so many directions. And as Professor Garratt was saying just a short while ago, we welcome anyone who would like to share their thoughts in terms of presentations they would like to see, or if they'd like to offer to speak. We would be happy to hear any feedback from you as well. So Professor Garratt, can I hand over the discussion to you now, or would you like me to?
Well, my chat line is still disabled, so I don't know why that has happened. But between us, I think we can make it work. What I would say is anybody now can ask questions, or one way of thinking about it is, why don't the people who have not yet spoken give us an update of where they are or questions that are in their heads right at the moment, please. Over to our participants.
Hi, Camille.
Hi there. Well, I don't really have a question, but I would like to say how informative I found this morning's session. Now, I have been in the boardroom for the last 30 years, but it's been primarily listed companies or public boards. So whereas I will have clients, because I'm an attorney, with businesses, family businesses, the extent to which you explore the issues, I found it really useful for us here in the Caribbean. And I just wanted to really share that. I found it very informative.
Well, thank you for that. I always find if I'm asked to go and talk with a family, I always go with Sally, my wife, who is an anthropologist, and the two of us know that it's going to be very intense and very emotional. And we're not at all surprised as we begin to get into listening to the family talk if we have a lot of tears, a lot of anger, repressed anger that's often gone on for a long time, and people trying to find a way out that will hold the family together and hold the business together, but often finding it very difficult to have the words to get over the emotions which they're facing. And this is something I rarely find on a corporate board.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, though, that in the Caribbean, we are now at that stage where a lot of these families, they are looking to hand over to the next generation. So the issues that have been described are really, really relevant to us. And the fact that Amin made as to how much impact this could have on the national economies if this process is not carefully handled is something I think that we in the Caribbean need to perhaps pay a bit more attention to.
Yeah.
So there is a question from Sajid in the chat. Are you seeing it, Professor Garratt? Because it is in the chat for everyone.
Right, sorry, I can't see it. So can you call out the question, please?
Sure. His question is, do family businesses really have a higher rate of failure versus non-family businesses?
I put that to Peter and to Annette and to Amin.
You probably saw me rolling my head.
Yes.
I'm just digging into my academic library, which is tucked away in the back of my head, and I cannot recall seeing any research that would suggest that family businesses have a higher, lower, or any different. I think the failure, the correlation between the ownership structure, if I could use that, and the continuity of failure of the business, so I think that correlation is untested. And as you know, any business is a complex adaptive system, more so if there's family, and you've talked about the emotions, Bob. Sajid, I would say to you, I'm not aware of any such correlations to answer your question. They may exist.
Okay, so can I just give you my thoughts on this? There are statistics, and some of these statistics are quite shocking.
Okay, love to see them.
What I'd like to say on this topic is that family businesses face dual challenges. Okay, families have to operate in a very difficult environment. Economic environment. For example, we've got COVID-19, we've got the global economic slowdown, we've got falling oil prices, we've got the US having a go at the Chinese, we've got all these issues that create a lot of stress from a business point of view. But as if that's not enough, family businesses also have to manage the transition of their families into the next generation and deal with family conflicts, which are inevitable. Okay, so the good news is that family businesses are actually very successful models. And if you look at statistics again, family businesses outperform non-family businesses by about 15%. Why? Because they take a long-term view, they're quite nimble, they don't overextend themselves, they create reserves for the future, and all of those good things. But the bad news is that only 3 to 4% of these families survive beyond the fourth generation.
Yeah.
And mainly, and that's
right.
mainly because of issues around succession, issues around continuity, generational change, and unresolved conflicts, and also lack of family leadership, which is becoming a huge problem. And what we're doing at the moment in the Middle East is spending a lot of time with the next generation to actually mentor the next generation about the importance of leadership. 80% of families fail because of lack of leadership.
I just want to say something here. There's a statistics that's bandied around, a third survive generation to generation. And the reality is that came out of a very small study of 200 families in one specific area in Massachusetts, but it has become folklore that nobody lasts, a third from generation to generation, what lasts. I haven't seen any studies recently that track this, but there are a couple of things to think about with regard to longevity of family businesses. All businesses have a shelf life, right? I think it's like 75 years by and large. A lot of businesses, they either die or sold out or they morph into something different. And a lot of family businesses do end up changing the direction of the business. They go into diversified business, they become family offices, so that while the original business may not exist, right, 2 or 3 generations down, there still is some kind of family holding. Whether it is wealth accumulation that the family manages together via family office or whatever, it is still, in my mind, a family business, because what you have are joint shareholdings belonging to one family. A lot of family businesses also go public and retain a certain percentage of the shares. And I don't know how you consider that, are those family businesses? In the Caribbean especially, we have quite a few businesses where the majority of the shares are owned by a family, but they're publicly traded companies. So that's another consideration of how family businesses change over time. But I agree with you, Amin. The difficulty is always the conflicts, as you put it earlier on, between the family and the business, and being able as I tell people, to put a boundary between the family and the business and create a bridge between the family and the business, you know, which is really my role as a consultant. That really is the trick there. And of course, training family members, as you say, towards good leadership and so on. And there are family businesses that are centuries old. There is an association of family businesses. It's called Les Hinokian, pardon my French. It is made up of family businesses that have been owned consecutively by the same family for over 200 years. It's named after Enoch in the Bible because he lived for 365 days and years and he was taken up live into heaven. So he lived forever. So there are, I mean, great examples, especially out there in the Far East, of businesses that have survived centuries practically. You know, so yes, we get a bad rap. The family businesses don't survive beyond 3 or 4 generations. And I challenge that. Like I say, they may change form and they may just go the way of all flesh in terms of how the lifespan of a company.
We have another question in the chat to Professor Garratt. It's a very interesting question from Sarod. He asks, how can a firm embrace its family DNA, particularly when family members are quite qualified or experienced and best suited to run a firm, while addressing governance issues of real or perceived conflicts of interest from other stakeholders, such as clients, employees, non-family shareholders, directors, etc. Is it possible, or is it something the firm or family has to live with?
Amin, do you want to talk?
I'm sorry, I didn't actually get the question.
Yeah, I'm having trouble. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wondered whether there were 2 parts to the question. One, and I don't know, but I mean, whether can a firm embrace its family DNA might be one part, and another part, perhaps, Sarud, we might have a discussion around management of conflicts of interest. It seems, would that be helpful if we have 2 parts to the response rather than, because I struggled with the question as well.
So let me probably add a little bit of clarity. It is that if you have a family-owned business where the family members have been groomed and have educated themselves, so they're quite competent to perform the job functions. But what you may get is perceptions of conflict of interest, because though they may be best suited to the job, it may be perceived that they are hired because they're family members. That's my understanding of the question.
Okay.
Okay, so perceived by who? Presumably perceived by the employees, the other employees, you mean?
And stakeholders.
So this is one of the things around family employment, and I think I talked about that earlier on. You know, it's very, very important that for those family businesses that decide to employ family members in the business, they need to treat family members in the same manner as you treat your professional non-family employees. So when they're actually performing management duties, they're wearing a different hat and not a shareholder's hat or a director's hat, and they should be evaluated accordingly, and they're accountable. And if they don't perform well, they face the consequences. If they perform well, they get incentives and bonuses. And therefore, you know, and that's very important, because if you don't do that, family businesses will not be able to retain good talent, because good talent will only come in, okay, if there is a career path for talent. And if they feel that family members are going to take over these roles just because they're family members, you will not be able to attract good talent. Will run away from you.
Correct.
I worked with 2 families, both of them in brewing, and both of them were had lasted 250 years each. And it was interesting to me that one of the family policies was they would never, ever in either family have more than 25% external shareholders. So that was an absolute on the one hand, and that internally the family would have very rigorous assessment criteria for who became both executives, of which there were very few, by the way, in the family. Most of the family members didn't want to be executive, but particularly for who became board members. And when the main board of one of these brewers, and they were international brewers, not just national, decided they were going to take on 2 independent directors who were not at all associated with the family. I attended the first board meeting where these 2 independents were being inducted. And at the end of the induction session, the chairman said, have either of you any questions you want to ask of the board before we get into the formal board meeting? And they both said, well, we have the same doubts. One of the senior family members is not a director and is not present at this meeting. And when will he join the board? And the chairman simply said, he will never join the board. The family have decided that he does not come up to the criteria for being a director of this family board. He knows this. He's a lovely man. He's independently wealthy now because of us. And we have had private family conversations with him to explain that he will never be a board member. Now, that was a very unusual conversation to hear, but I'm sure it goes on in quite a lot of families who are, if we go back to Annette's point, very long-term family businesses. And in their case, they are also just beginning, after 250 years, to develop the family office approach and the approach to philanthropy that is often associated with that.
Could I say something, Kamla? Right. With regard to, I'm sorry. Are you done, Bob? Sorry.
No, after you, please.
All right. With regard to the question of this perceived conflict of interest, really is really perception of the other stakeholders, of family members who are very competent to work in the business. The answer really is, for me, 2 words: competence and humility. If you are competent as a family member, all the people around the business, the bankers, everybody will recognize your competence, right? And you will earn respect that way. And an understanding that, hey, that person is not there just because their last name happens to be on the company billboard. And most of all, humility in terms of how you deal with the fellow employees, because you are a fellow employee. Persons in the office next to you, you may be a shareholder, but you are an employee, and that person next to you is a fellow employee. And therefore, you treat them with that level of respect. So basically, that would be my answer to Saru: competence and humility.
Shall we hear from Richard Foster in Cape Town? Richard? Richard, you're muted at the moment.
Okay, sorry, I missed that last bit.
Well, would you ask your question, please? The one on the chat line.
Sorry, that's not a question. It's just a comment, Bob, saying I think if you put family in at either board level or management level, or even at an employee level, you need to have clear policies and be transparent about it, because it's important to get stakeholder buy-in so they actually understand where the decisions are made, who actually runs the business. And I think the other thing that's quite important, just having a look at the one of the comments in the chat, if you do bring in independent directors, I think it's critical to allow the independent directors to play a role and not bring them in purely for rubber stamping and saying, well, now we've got them, so we do have some independence on the board. And I mean, I'm aware of a number of independent directors who've resigned from boards purely from the fact that they say, well, I'm unable to add value, or worse still, discharge my fiduciary duties as a director of the company due to the dynamics of the family. Thank you.
That's a very important point, actually, and you know, the whole issue of empowerment of not just the board directors, but if you're going to employ a CEO, a non-family CEO in a family business, you better give him proper empowerment. Otherwise, you're going to lose it, because money is not everything. Good talent don't just come in because they get good money. They're looking at other things. And the problem with family businesses, I find, is that it takes a very, very long time, and sometimes they never get there in terms of trusting the people that work for them. And those families that develop the trust and relationship, and it takes a long time, they're quite successful. But if you don't empower your people, whether they're board of directors or whether they're management, then you're going to lose them.
Correct.
And to add to that, what I like to say is when you're bringing on independent directors, I think you need a fairly long period of orientation. They need to learn about the family and the family culture, so that while they are there giving advice, they know how to do it in a way that it will be well received and able to be taken on board. So that really is to me a key to get the right kind of person to be an independent director. Because I agree, if you're bringing somebody to just be a rubber stamp or to be ignored, they will walk out the door immediately. But for that person to function well, they need to have good background information about all the dynamics within the business and within the family, I feel.
Yeah, so basically everyone there is addressing this question from Sajid, which was, what is the role of non-family members in developing governance structures? If they are key, they may not be happy and leave. Okay, let me just ask a question from Imtiaz. He said, Annette, the issue of humility as a key to success in the family business is very interesting. I imagine that having leaders who may be founders or family members would also need to be inclusive, if not humble, in their approach to foster success. Would the panel agree with this?
%100%.
Okay, so while we wait for another question or comment from our participants, I want to ask a question in relation to the whole conflict management situation with families, because both panelists as well as Peter spoke about that with respect to how you can get that vision in the first place, but then you must have the conflict management system. The reality is there is conflict in the boardroom, whether it's a family-owned business or not. So can we ask for some guidance from our panel in terms of, what would you recommend in terms of handling conflict among directors in the boardroom?
The starting point for this, I guess, is to recognize that that a board is a collective of directors who are there, are charged to work together. That's their job, right? But conflicts will happen, of course. In a family business, the additional dynamic is that some of those directors may be family members, and they've still got to sit down and have Christmas lunch or Ramadan or whatever, and so you can't outsource that family stuff in the way that the textbooks might prescribe. I'm quite comfortable in my experience, listening to Bob and Amin also and Annette, that there is a balance here between setting up a policy and a structure, which is cold and black and white, if you will, before you have problems. But there needs to be a strong relational component. And we've talked about humility. We've talked about trust. And part of this, transparency was also a word used. We need to be comfortable around the board table, around the management team, between those two groups and back into the family to be able to raise issues. One of the very, very seemingly, Albert Einstein said, make everything as simple as you can and not one bit simpler. And when I first heard this example, I thought it was too simple, and then I knew it worked. This one particular company I worked with, maybe about 12 years ago now, 10, 12 years ago, had these little rocks. They weren't much bigger than the earbud case, you know. And if I had a problem with something, say with you, Kamla, what I'd do is I'd have a meeting with you, and it were always in person, and I'd bring my rock and I'd put it on your desk. And your job would be to put your rock, because everybody would have a rock. It would be part of if you're going to join this company, you get a rock, and the rock is it's a signal that we're going to have potentially a tough conversation. Yeah, because some people really struggle to start to raise, I got a problem, you know, because of their personality. And so this company had these rocks, and it was the honesty rock. And the whole thing about the rock is you could rant and rave. You could be as emotional as you like, but before and after, there was decorum. And it signaled to the other person that they were heading for perhaps a turbulent, you know, and they would say things, and it became part of the culture. I want to have a rock conversation with you, Bob or Annette, you know, and it go, but I tell you what, there was a lot of stuff came out. They had one other rule with the rock. The rock moved the organizational structure from a hierarchy structure to an egalitarian flat. So anybody could have any conversation respectfully. It's got to be consistent with company values with anybody else. Now, that's just one mechanism, because it's to help us move, because some of us, and I'm part of it, sometimes we struggle to bring difficult conversations to voice because we don't want to offend somebody. They even put it on their website, made it public. Great.
Annette, yeah.
Yes, I was just going to say, in one of my other lives, I teach courses on difficult conversations. And I feel like when I deal with families, I try my very best to get them to sit for a couple hours just to learn some of the mechanisms of how to have a difficult conversation, to learn about themselves and the people around them, so that they know how to approach the conversation in a way that doesn't allow it to escalate and become disrespectful, as Peter was just saying. I think it's critical that those kinds of things be taught to families in business and to directors in a board. And the other thing too is, directors in a board, the conflict should be, to my mind, about an issue. You know, should we buy this property? Should we not? These are very objective measures, you know. So once people then begin to make it personal, then what you have there is a lack of maturity, really. Conflict should arise over, to my mind, in a boardroom especially, those are the kinds of conflicts that are meaningful, you know. Who has more information about this issue? What the property next door being sold for? What, you know, what's the pro forma invoice for this? And then when you can do it objectively, you remove some of the emotionality, I hope, from the conflict. But if it becomes a conflict between you and I, well, then that's a different kind of thing. It's no place really in a business discussion per se.
So, so if I can just add a couple of points there. So in a family business, obviously the board is a mixture of, you know, most family businesses will be a mixture of family members who are directors and independent directors. Okay, and I think the role of the chairman is extremely important. Okay, when it comes to discussions or issues of disagreement, when it comes to business issues. Okay, the role of the chairman is extremely important. Now, there will obviously, in a family business, you will have dynamics between the family board of directors. And usually the reasons are actually outside the boardroom. There will be some issues that they're grappling with, which has got nothing to do with the board. But because of the egos and because of the issues, when they're having a boardroom discussions, these things come up. And really, it's up to the chairman, and the chairman's got to be really, really, you know, a strong, mature, and someone who can actually look you know, at the whole picture. And when it comes to conflict involving family, then that should be taken away from the board. And what families do then is try and resolve those conflicts via a conflict resolution mechanism, because usually the things are not actually around the board issues. Because as you said, the board issues around, you know, shall we do this? Why are we not profitable? Or are we going to open another company in Uganda or something like that? You know, what is our strategy going forward, our cash flows and all of that kind of thing. But when there are family issues, I think it's very difficult for the board of directors to be dealing with. They have to be dealt with outside the board.
Correct. I think there's also that's a really useful distinction. Another one that might be helpful is to think, you know, are we dealing with something here that we're looking at it from multiple perspectives? So we're dealing with an issue of tension around solving a problem that we agree is a problem, or have we got outright conflict where we've got potentially deep-seated views? So tension's okay, no problem. Conflict is difficult, and some of those difficult conversations, they can both occur in the boardroom, and they can both obviously occur separately back into the family. And your distinction, I mean, that we need to deal with the right thing in the right place is a very helpful reminder. I encourage, if there are independent directors involved with family members at the board table, I encourage that if one of those independent directors is chair capable, that they take that role of chair to provide a level of independence and balance. It's not always possible, but that's something that is a useful starting point for that role of chair. It's a very, very tough job, and if you can have a degree of separation and almost détente, you know, I'm thinking of Henry Kissinger going around as an envoy. Sometimes it's almost like that, so to have a degree of independence can be helpful in that chair role if you've got independent directors.
I've used a particular technique more with corporate boards, but I have used it with family boards to some effect. Just before a break, when they have said we are running into problems, we don't quite know how to deal with these, and we're holding stuff back, to get them to take a piece of paper, write their name on top, and then down the left-hand column, the other 10, 12 directors' names, and then 3 columns to the right of that. Just one comment on what this person does well. Second column on what could they do more of, and third column on what could they do less of. And then we as independent, not directors, but consultants, take that away over the coffee break or whatever, the lunch break or whatever, and write those up. So the person can only see their name, no other names, but can see all the comments. And then they're handed back and they say, can you see any patterns in this? Now, at that point, it gets very interesting because most people are dreading what's going to come out. And for the most part, well, you get 2 types of reaction. One is, oh my God, I know I do that. Yes, I really ought not to be doing that. Or occasionally, and sometimes at the same time, oh, I didn't realize I was actually quite good at doing that sort of thing. I'd never really thought about it that way. And if carefully shared, they will take over and run that process themselves from then on, normally laughing and being rude to each other and generally, but it it's actually very, very powerful indeed, because it begins to allow them to deal with the emotional side and emotional blockages particularly, and then deal with it in very, very simple ways. Could be dealt with around the boardroom table, could be dealt with outside. I mean, one of the ones that I always remember was one of the big state-owned boards in South Africa having to bring on board 40% Black board members, which they did not, the existing board did not select. So that was pretty heavy tension. It wasn't a family business, but once we did that sort of process, after a couple of board meetings, one of the things that came out, well, one of the old, very white, very grey back senior directors said, looking at his piece of paper, everybody in this room seems to think I talk too much. And they all said yes. And he said, I know I do. And I talk too much because I'm often quite nervous. And so I just keep talking. Can anybody help me by showing a way we can do it? And one of the young Black women said, we took 4 young Black women onto the board, said, if I just raise my finger to my lips when I feel you're doing too much, would that be okay? And he said, yeah, great. And that became just one of the simple things that could be done. And he began to feel a lot more relaxed. He then came to me afterwards and said as well, one of the things that really intimidate me about these new board members is they all come in bright-eyed, bushy tails and with their laptops. I can't use a laptop. Please, can I have lessons paid for by the board just to train me privately to do such a thing? Because I'd feel a lot more confident, even if I didn't know exactly how to use it, if it was in front of me and I could be seen to be fiddling around with it. So that would give me something to play with. So there are some very, very human aspects to all of this at very senior levels. And sometimes we forget that.
The former Prime Minister of New Zealand, James Bolger, is now well into his 80s. When he completed his time as a Prime Minister, he became and appointed as the ambassador to Washington and subsequently chaired some corporate boards. He had from a large Catholic family, so he had to manage a whole lot of relationships in his personal life. Rather famously, he told a group of us at a dinner one night about a particular technique that he used where there was quite marked differences of opinion around the board table, which I've subsequently used elsewhere. And when he was chairing, he would do this. The discussion would proceed. He'd make a determination that we were not getting particularly far. And he'd look at his watch rather pointedly and, I think it's time for a cup of tea. And they'd adjourn for 15 minutes or however long he decided, but he'd never say how long the adjournment would be for. And during the adjournment, he'd go around individually each other director and just have a private chat. It could be one sentence, it could be a few minutes. And when he was satisfied, he would come back and he'd say, oh, thank you very much for that. Now, before we broke, we were having this discussion, and it seems to me that this is the general position we got to. There were 1 or 2, and he'd just summarize it up beautifully. And so can we agree that that's the general position? And you basically preempt it and take the heat out of it. And I guess you have to be an elder statesman to pull it off. But it worked incredibly well to get that done. So there are different techniques. I quite like yours, Bob. Make a list. That
wasn't inspiration, that was desperation from my side.
Well, somehow, and this is where the experience and the value of this group is so high, that each of us have different experiences, and through sharing them, we pick up these things, these insights, that work in different situations or may not work.
Now, may I speak to Kamala for a moment? Kamala, we're coming up on our time. We have some more questions. I'm wondering if we might take some of those questions, particularly, for example, about the whole induction and development of boards, both family and corporate boards, as another session altogether. Would people be comfortable with us beginning to take that and look at our experiences, our combined experiences in those areas? I know we have, yes, there's lots of thumbs ups and yeses coming through there. So I apologize if we haven't answered your question immediately, but we will try and get there in the next 2 or 3 months. Kamala, can I hand back to you after thanking our speakers again and everybody who's inputted to that. Thank you very much indeed. Kamala, we have a session coming up in June and I think one in August. Do you want to talk about those, please?
Okay, sure. The session in June would be delivered by Charlotte Villet, who is the former chairman of the Institute of Directors out of London. And she would be dealing specifically with the topic of onboarding of directors and induction. And as Richard Foster was pointing out in his contribution, there's so many important things which need to be done during that specific area. I just want to check quickly if Professor Frank Kuhneman is still with us. He had joined the discussion earlier. He had given a really brilliant presentation during our global conference on the role of induction and orientation and so. And what that brought out was specifically for us in the Caribbean, how little attention is paid in that area and what a huge difference it can make towards having a board that is really well run. So I'm really looking forward to us having that session. So we invite everyone who is here, please make sure that you are part of the discussion because it really enhances all of our understanding as we move forward. Professor Garratt, my time is saying it's 3:10. To me, we do have a few more minutes.
Okay.
So there was a question from, let me see, who was it? Michelle Fuller had asked, so I'm just going to ask it. How can you advocate with the family members to allow the professionals hired who are the experts in their field of operations to make decisions without these decisions being overridden due to personal choices? So to my mind, that is very similarly related to a question asked by Christopher, where he says, whether family see management as being responsible for governance oversight, how can the family be encouraged to take more ownership of governance? So we have in one instance where you have brought in independent experts to form the governance for the family-owned business, but yet family makes their decisions and goes their own way, regardless. And then here we have where the question is, how can we encourage the family members themselves to really take responsibility for governance oversight?
Well, my response to that is, are we really talking here about the experts becoming shadow directors? Because if that is the case, then that needs to be resolved. They are not to take decisions on behalf of the others or nor influence it. The decisions have to be taken by the family members as registered directors. Now, I know in principle that's the case. In practice, it can go all over the place. I have a live case of that right now, where I've had to say to a very experienced lawyer and financier that he must not come into the board, guide them in ways that they don't necessarily want to be guided, tell them what their decisions are, and then abandon all responsibility from his side. And he is most upset about this. But some of the younger board members are beginning to understand that that is their role to take the decisions, and he should be giving them options and discussing the options and the pros and cons of those, not giving them pre-digested solutions to the thing. Now, I'm not quite sure, was that the intention of the question?
There's a comment there in the last line about overriding due to personal choices. And
Yeah.
it seemed to me, Bob, your point is well made. Is the advisor well understanding their role, that they're bringing external expertise that's not otherwise present, whether it's into the boardroom or into a management structure? They're retained, they're asked to comment in some way. They provide that commentary, that assessment. But a good advisor will understand that they need to stop there. There may be some recommendations, but the decision necessarily should stay with the board or with the manager, exactly as you point out. And if a board comes to understand that, and if they've got, if they've read Stop the Rot or Fish Rots from the Head, then they should understand that. But if the board understands that and they start to realise that their professional contributor is capturing them, they need to quickly come to terms with the possibility of exiting that advisor who's trying to do their job for them. And that's a difficult thing. In terms of governance itself, to Christopher's question, the responsibility for governance lies in the boardroom, not in the family and not in management. I think that's a maxim that we need to hold closely to, and that the family can and should understand its role as a shareholder, as an absolutely legitimate stakeholder. But the governance function is something that's in the board, and if the board of directors, whether they're fully comprised of family members or partially with independent or even dominant by independent, that group of men and women need to also understand their role and take responsibility to try and discharge it well. If we don't talk about it, then the default is that we've all got an idea how to do it, and there's a very high chance they'll all be quite different ideas of how to do it, and we'll end up with a mess. So this is the induction on-ramp for you, Kamala, for the next session, because these matters that we're now talking about, these matters are exactly the types of matters that can and should be discussed in an induction process.
Yeah. Okay, then I shall now definitely blow the whistle on time, because I know people on different continents have very different places to go to now. Everything from breakfast through to dinner, late supper. So thank everybody indeed. And I hand back to Kamala just to reinforce those dates of the next two meetings, please.
Yeah, well, we do have closing remarks from Alison.
Yes.
So we'll have her closing remarks, and then I'll do a quick vote of thanks when those dates again.
Okay, and now this is standing between me and my bed from where I am, so I'll make it brief. I'd just like to thank Bob and Kamala for bringing us together again on such an important issue. And I think Peter, Annette and Amin should be thanked for the interesting and thought-provoking discussion, which kind of raised, I think, a lot of very important points. I was reminded, I've recently been watching this TV series Succession, which, if you haven't watched it, is a very good example of how not to run a family business. And I think a lot of the topics that were raised today are dealt with within that TV series. I think for us, the learnings certainly that I've written down are the importance of alignment on vision and purpose, transparency, trust, deal with the right thing in the right place, manage expectations, whether they're around employment, dividends, reinvestment, the future of the business. I've got the message, which I think I kind of knew anyway, that this is all very complex and will take a long time to sort out. Patience, competence, humility, all of these words I think are key words to think about when thinking about family businesses. So big thank you as well to all the participants for the questions and the comments. And last but not least, thank you to Christy for making the whole pulling together of everything work. So thank you everybody from me.
And
good night. I know some of, sorry.
No,
We're over to Kamla now. I'm handing back to Kamla before I can go to my bed.
Thanks, Alison.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Alison. I really must say how much I enjoyed today's discussion. You know, as Annette had pointed out, and Camille underscored it too, here in the Caribbean region, you know, our family-owned businesses are actually quite large, and they can make such a huge difference on quality of life, you know, our whole social structure here in the region. And it's important for us to really be able to discuss these issues and get a handle on it. Because again, as Annette said, we are just really second generation, you know, after the World War, that a lot of these businesses may have started here in the region. And so we're pretty young in the business. And it is so much easier if we can learn from others to help ensure that we don't repeat some of those mistakes, but can really push towards growing family-owned businesses in such a way that they continue to be the kind of successes that we want to have. So I want to also encourage everyone, make sure you sign up for Governance Week, because we'll have an entire day focused on family-owned businesses as well. Okay, so as Professor Garratt also asked, let me remind all of you, our next session is June 2nd, and we will be focused on onboarding and orientation, induction of directors. Please make sure you are part of that discussion. We would have another session on August 4th because it's every 2 months. Then in October, and we will be ending our informal network for this year with a global conference, possibly the first week of December. We just have to discuss those dates with Professor Garratt, and we will begin to put plans in place for how we can bring this global think tank together for a 2-day conference again. All right, so thank you all very much, not only for being here with us, but for your contributions and interest and helping us to be able to fulfill part of what we consider to be our vision and mandate, and that is bringing the governance discussions to the forefront so we can help in improving those practices. Amin, happy birthday again. It really was so wonderful of you to share today with us as it's your birthday. And it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us. And Peter, of course, we consider you to be a friend of CCGI now. You'd be hearing from us every so often. Okay, Alison, we will have you tomorrow for persons who may be interested for themselves, senior managers or directors. We need to learn about board evaluation here in the region. So Alison has a masterclass tomorrow. You can still contact us if you're interested. And I want to end by thanking Professor Garratt as well. You know, it's such a wonderful thing for us to be able to make use of the crisis that COVID would have brought to turn into opportunities that allow us to link this way and have persons across different continents come together and share our experiences and lessons that we have learned. So thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Kamla. Stay healthy and see you on the 2nd of June.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks all. Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks for your